Well, on that note, we're going to switch gears here to another story that is, well, it's actually not capturing any headlines, despite the fact that it really should. And that is the reauthorization of a lot of the NSA spying programs that we have all come to learn a lot about, especially thanks to Edward Snowden and his releases there. And to talk more about this, we are very, very honored to be joined once again by Kevin Gosztola, who is the curator of the dissenter.org newsletter and also the co-host of the podcast Unauthorized Disclosure. Kevin, as always, thanks so much for being back with us.
Hey, good to talk with both of you again.
Well, Kevin, here we are yet again, the Section 702 reauthorization coming up in Congress, not getting a lot of news as much as it should probably here in the U.S. press. And, I find people are often, and this is maybe part of the issue, somewhat confused about these programs, don't know everything about it. So just quickly, if you could give us an encapsulation of Section 702 and why this is such a crucial thing to follow.
Certainly. So 702 is actually a program that is now favored by the national security state because of the fact that there were modest reforms that were passed after Edward Snowden exposed all of these mass surveillance programs that were at the fingertips of intelligence agencies to do global surveillance, to do, even domestic surveillance. And you might recall that there was something that allowed for bulk email collections. It was called Section 215, and that ended up being reined in. So they just jumped over to this other program. They call it Section 702 now. It's another part of this FISA Amendments Act that was passed in 2008. That's something that President Barack Obama, before he was president, actually voted for, and it was a big deal because he had been on the campaign trail talking about how he was against Bush-era abuses of power when it came to surveillance, but yet he voted for this. And thrown in there, I think there was retroactive immunity that ended up being granted to the different telecommunications companies that were involved in warrantless wiretapping after the September 11th attacks. It's all important history because for the last 25 years, people who care about privacy and civil liberties have been playing this struggle. I've been working this struggle to try and get these security agencies to quit abusing people and quit engaging in these massive surveillance programs that violate the rights and are also used to target activists. If you'll give me just a moment, I'd like to read you this list of exactly who has been violated as a result of this program. This comes from the Brennan Center for Justice, but I have this here just because, rather than try to memorize it and give it to you, why don't I just give you the list very clearly? There were searches for 141 racial justice protesters. By the way, the FBI is the one that's abusing this, I believe. There were political activist groups that were involved in organizing protests that were searched for. There were searches for two men of, quote, Middle Eastern descent who were loading cleaning supplies into a truck. Searches for mosques that were intentionally mislabeled to avoid any oversight. So do it in a way so people can't tell that we're looking at mosques. Searches for Professor Xiaozing Zi, an American academic who was wrongly accused of unlawfully sharing sensitive technology with scientists in China. Searches for a state court judge who reported civil rights violations to the FBI. So, hey, why don't we do an investigation into the person who says we're not acting properly? Searches for immigrants, even with no indication they pose a risk to national security. Batch, so this is important, batch searches can be done. Batch means that you're just grabbing thousands upon thousands at one time. Searches that included current and former federal government officials, journalists, political commentators, and 19,000 donors to a congressional campaign. So now we're doing surveillance of political donors to a political campaign. Searches for a sitting congressman, a U.S. senator, and a state senator. And then the last one here is that there were searches for a local political party at one point in the United States. That's not what this is sold to Americans as a tool for. It's supposed to be for keeping us all safe from terrorism. But we know that that has actually never proven to be true, that any of these programs have prevented any terrorist attacks. I went back before the show and looked, and one of the things they tried to claim after Edward Snowden exposed the program where our phone call records were being kept. They said that like 54 terrorism plots had been thwarted. But when you whittled it down, it was pretty easy to find out that that was a complete and total lie.
You know, Kevin, I'm curious. There was a time when it was a politically popular topic, everything that you just talked about. But it's kind of, I think, over the years faded into the background a bit. I'm not really sure why. It's just not as popularly discussed. It doesn't get that much media coverage anymore. It's kind of like, just been accepted. They warrantless wiretapping is a thing. We just accept it and deal with it. So I'm just curious, politically speaking, is there anyone in a position of power this is still their issue, that's advocating against this? I imagine Joe Biden is not one of those people. But are there people in Congress who are pushing against this?
Yeah, so before we did this broadcast today, there was drama in Congress around 702 reauthorization. And actually, the reason why we're not talking about a vote right now on this show, because it was scheduled to come up for a vote, is because the House Intelligence Committee people had it yanked from the floor so they couldn't vote on it, had Speaker Mike Johnson remove it because they were afraid they were going to lose. The House Judiciary Committee has Republicans that are privacy-minded, libertarian-leaning, so to speak, and they care about this civil liberties issue to the point that they passed a version of reauthorization with a warrant requirement. So if the FBI or any of these agencies wanted to do a search, they would have to go get a warrant in order to do it. The intelligence community does not like that. And so they were afraid they were going to lose the vote and ended up getting it yanked. And now we're hearing that they're likely to shove this into a big, massive spending bill so that if Republicans who want to protect civil liberties vote against that spending bill, they're going to be shutting the government down, and then they're going to look terrible. This is a ploy, and it's sad, in my opinion, that I can't point to progressive Democrats or anyone leaning left who is making a big deal out of it. It really does come down to, it would seem, these Republicans that are more aligned with even Donald Trump, who are the ones that have taken up this issue of mass surveillance. So for left-leaning people who care about privacy, who care about this, because in order to organize and engage in activism, we can't have everybody out there on the streets being targeted by the national security state. People who understand their history of COINTELPRO shouldn't be vesting the FBI with this kind of authority. But there had been this morphing in the last 4 to 6 years where people turned into supporters of the FBI because it turned its attention to Donald Trump.
Kevin, and I'm glad you mentioned that one as well, because it seems like to me this also really reinforces the importance of, not only whistleblowers as a concept, but things like the case of Julian Assange that's still before us, because, quite frankly, we probably can't really depend on those in a position of power to reveal a lot of these things. And it's because of those who have taken great, great risks that we even know a lot of the little bit that we do know. I know Mr. Assange is continuing to face extradition here to the United States. I think there's some things coming up next week. Where does that case stand?
Yeah, so next week there's a major appeal hearing on February 20th and 21st. It's his first chance to ask an appeals court for a wider hearing. If he loses, he has no more avenues in the legal system in the UK. It's believed that this could be his last best hope for avoiding extradition to the United States. There should be an opportunity to appeal to the European Court of Human Rights if he loses at this level. But supporters, press freedom advocates have dubbed February 20th Day X because it is that significant. It really could be the point in which the U.S. wins, finally, as they have hoped, and are able to put Julian Assange on a plane before the year is over, so that he could be on trial in Alexandria, Virginia for journalism. And that's something that everyone's chewing over. And the fact that President Joe Biden and his Justice Department and Attorney General Merrick Garland are willing to go through with it is stunning. But like a lot of what we've been seeing as you were discussing the events in Gaza, we're seeing how far this administration is willing to go in just laughing and not taking any of the principles or values they claim seriously. They're so brazen in the way that they exercise power right now. And I think because they believe they can get away with it, they would bring Julian Assange to the US and put him on trial because, as we're talking about surveillance or you're talking about Assange, these are things that exist in some kind of universe where they believe nobody's going to hold them accountable. Nobody's going to stop them. So why not? Let's do it because there are people who want to put him on trial. The CIA wants to put him on trial because they're upset that they were the victim to one of the largest leaks in the history of their agency in 2017 when CIA hacking materials were published. Well, they just got the leaker sentenced to 33 years in prison. His name's Joshua Schulte. So now let's make sure that we follow through with this and complete the job and get Julian Assange in and make sure that he is convicted. And so there's nothing stopping him, even though Australia in the parliament, they just voted to say that their government supports dropping the charges against Julian Assange because he's one of their own. He's an Australian citizen. And so I don't know. It doesn't really look good for Julian Assange, but there's never been more support for Julian Assange to end the case. So that does make me feel a little bit more hopeful because 35 plus law professors were just organized by Freedom of the Press Foundation to send a message to Attorney General Merrick Garland to let the Justice Department know that this needs to end. There's all kinds of little blips like this that show that time is running out for the US government to continue this and still have people's support. But Julian Assange is 52 years old. He's been in some form of arbitrary detention for the last 10 to 15 years. His health is deteriorating. 2 or 3 years ago, he had a mini stroke. How does this end? It could end with him dying in Belmarsh prison in London, where he is being held right now. And so I think they figure that if they can just keep dragging this on and on and on, it doesn't matter because at some point he's probably not going to be alive anymore. So they could put him on trial or they could just let him die in prison. And that's what everyone organizing is trying to avoid an outcome where he's either put on trial or dies in prison.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kevin, real quick before we let you go, you've been dogged on this beat for some time now. Where can folks find your work?
If you go to thedissenter.org, you can find my work there. I'm doing a Countdown to Day X series right now that gives everybody a breakdown on what to expect with the appeal hearing next week. So thank you both.
No, of course. Thank you.